Hello and welcome to AMA Puget Sound's Coffee Talk series live on alternating Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. Our guest today is Aaron Templer. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you? Nice to see
I'm
you as always.
fantastic. Yes, it's so great to see you. And whenever I get a chance to talk to you, in fact, you and I were just talking right before we went live
Yeah,
about all the fun things that AMA does. And the next time we get to see each other in person might be in May. So that's really exciting.
could be. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a while. I think the last time we saw each other was in Seattle, which was awesome. And I kind of snuck into a board meeting, and
Yep.
I think we had a beer together and stuff. So
Yep.
yeah, it was fun to see you. I miss Seattle. I miss you. It'll be fun to be in person again for sure.
And vice versa. Yeah, that was I think that was about 6 months before shutdown.
Was it? Wow.
Before
Yeah,
lockdown. Yep.
right
Yep.
before. Yep.
Yep. And I think the previous fall regional retreat, which is something that AMA leaders attend, it was in Denver, your neck of the woods.
Yeah, there was one here. I remember that. Amber McKenna from the Portland chapter was here. I remember seeing her and
Hmm.
a bunch of
I
people
was
kind
there.
of from,
Yep.
and you were there. Yeah.
I
So
was.
yeah, that was a
Good
good
stuff.
time as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But before we actually get into the episode, I do want to acknowledge AMA, American Marketing Association, because we did the math, and between Aaron and I, we have nearly 20 years experience. We have about the same amount of time, so yeah, nearly 20 years experience. So you can tell both of us are very, very, very engaged and very invested in the organization. And I wanted to address that briefly since we're kind of able to both be here. So I wanted to quick acknowledge, like, how did you get started, and what has kept you?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is I was not really aware of the AMA before I joined the board to actually be president. They asked me to be president, and I'd been to like, I don't know, a handful of happy hours or something before saying yes. So I was thrown into the deep end pretty significantly. So in some ways, my tenure on the AMA is pretty short compared to what people will do, kind of working their way through the board and then
Mhm.
accepting a leadership position like that. So I went president-elect, past president of AMA Colorado, and then
Mhm.
straight to the Professional Chapters Council, which is this national council of past presidents and volunteers. So, yeah, it's kind of short actually for some people.
Right, right. And then quickly, because I've never talked about it, at least not in the broadcast, but I actually started in Green Bay. I was a co-founding board member there,
Oh, cool.
starting in, February. I think actually next month we had our first meeting to decide whether or not we were going to just create our own little marketing organization in Northeast Wisconsin, or if we were
Uh-huh.
going to affiliate with AMA. And it was 2 months later we decided, no, we're going to go AMA. They have all the resources. And yeah, it was amazing. And then it cut to about a year after we became affiliated in 2013. I moved here to Seattle, and I contacted the VP of membership to make sure my membership had transferred. And in the Green Bay chapter or the Northeast Wisconsin chapter, I'd been secretary. So I was already heavily involved. And I
Mhm.
just wanted to see if my membership transferred, wasn't looking for getting involved at all. And by the end of the call, I was becoming the VP of mentoring.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
What just
good for
happened?
you.
Yeah,
Yeah. By the
yep,
end of the call, you're like, congratulations, you're on the
right.
board.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I had just created a mentor program for my last role, so it just made
Uh,
sense. And then through that, became president-elect, and then just finished my presidency 2 years, um, and now I'm immediate past president. So yeah, different journeys, but we're both right here, so it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been
Yeah.
a great experience to get to meet people like you. But, all of the volunteer chapter leaders across the country represent those memes that you see a lot on social media. Like you need to surround yourself with people who will lift you up and,
Hmm.
make sure that it's who we surround ourselves with and all that kind of stuff. That's what it looks like. I mean, all of you around the country are just the givers of the world. And it's been amazing to just
Hmm.
surround myself with that energy, if nothing
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
But I also find that it's an incredible talent pool that I hire quite a bit from
Mhm.
my agency, 3/4 here in Denver. There's the plug. So that's been incredible too. I've got talent from literally the entire country to pull from when it comes time to kind of scale. So that's been super helpful too. I love it.
Yeah.
AMA has been great for me.
Same here. And traditionally, like in marketing, I've been the marketing department where I'm a marketing team of one, and
Right.
nobody else gets what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of educating your peers, your colleagues at work. But when you get to an AMA event, oh my gosh, you can finally talk about things you can use. You can use the terms that we use rather than trying to explain it in
Yeah.
layman terms. So it's a place to geek out with your marketing friends, and it's okay. Everybody's nice. We all, yeah, there's competition within the job market, but honestly, we're all trying to see each other succeed.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really true. You really, again, when you sort of create that flame and the moths come and those moths are sort of like-minded and want to share and give and community build, you're going to find a lot of people that are collaborative and supportive. And by the way, I think people who are involved in boards like the AMA are what's going to pull all of these threads back together that have been kind of pulled apart from the pandemic.
Yep.
There couldn't be anything more important right now than community building, and the volunteers of the AMA, maybe it's one or two threads that they're pulling together, but it's vital. So
Yeah.
there's no more important work right now than community building, like with the AMA.
Exactly. So check out your local chapter. Pretty much every state has at least one chapter. So find who they are, find where they are. If there isn't one near you, start one. It's really not that hard. I can tell you, there's work, but it's worth it. And I don't know if many people know this, but it's amazing how many people don't. But for each chapter, there has to be a radius of like 50 miles, so you don't have that competition between chapters because you're really not trying to compete. You're just trying to serve. So find your local chapter and get involved now. But onto the show. Onto the show. So first of all, let's talk about you, Aaron, and kind of what led you to where you are right now. You've just published a book, and which we'll talk about in a moment. But how did you get to where you are now?
Circuitously, is that the right word for not very straight?
Yes.
Yeah, I was a musician for most of my young life and went to music college and came home to Denver after going to school in Boston, and was looking for a day job basically, and started working in the mailroom for a software company that made graphic design software.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of worked my way up through that company and built this marketing career out of that. So there's an old movie reference, The Secret to My Success, with Michael J. Fox. It's sort of like that sort of
Okay.
scene, right, where I was in the mailroom. But it was a great place to
Yeah.
cut my teeth because it was technology. So I kind of learned, you can push a lot of buttons and not break anything, and experiment with digital stuff without having to, worry about ending the world. So that was good. It was we were doing marketing for marketers, right? So I learned about creative departments. We were working with the best creative departments across the country, Rolling Stone and huge ad agencies and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an incredible place to cut my teeth in the marketing world. And then a couple of jobs later, ended up at the University of Denver doing some marketing for their business school. Left there about 13, 14 years ago to start my own agency, and been doing that ever since. So um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's kind of the strange route.
Gotcha. How big is your agency now?
Small. We're intentionally small and boutique.
Okay.
We don't have stars in our eyes. We don't follow big brands. We follow big values, is what we say. So we like to find organizations that align with our values,
Mm-hmm.
where we can actually add value, and work in a fulfilling way that kind of honors our humanity and our time, but also the organizations that we're working with. And that sometimes takes the form of a cause-based nonprofit, but
Sure.
sometimes takes the form of a family-owned business. Something kind of there usually is something at the center of our clients other than profit,
Sure.
and so yeah, we're small
Yeah, but I would imagine you get to hear a lot of different stories then from
for
customers, like,
sure.
yeah, and their goals, and that must be a lot of fun.
For sure. And the business model is one that scales up and down in response to clients, just like business scales up and down, as opposed to some sort of rigid model with a big payroll or something. We really want to just be nimble and flexible to client needs, whether that be new clients that we take on, or client growth, or when a client steps back their marketing work. So it's a real flexible model.
That's awesome. Flexible enough that you were able to write a book.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book, and share the name, please. I have it down below, but I'm
Yeah,
quizzing.
no, leading in a social world, leading in a social world.
What and with that title, what does that mean to you? What are you expressing with that?
Yeah, I think marketing has kind of had the hands on the levers of social media within organizations for a long time, and it's biased us into how we view social constructs and what is generated by way of value in those constructs. And so I'm challenging us to suggest that, first of all, this is very against the grain, by the way,
Mm,
for a lot of your marketing folks that are listening, and certainly agencies like mine. But marketing as a social media marketing is not an effective tool. And
mm,
there's a lot of data to support this. We looked at a bunch of like over 50 studies, and a lot of there's been people that have looked at it before me. It's not an effective tool for marketing, but what does drive value is building and using social capital, which is a leadership skill, not a marketing one. So if you really want to drive value in social constructs, including those that are online, like social media, you have to
mm,
approach it differently than we do as marketers. So it's
mm.
kind of challenging our biases, taking a look at the data, hopefully in a fresh way through the lens of a leader as opposed to a marketer.
Right.
And then thinking about what are the skills that I need to develop to build social capital, again, through that leadership lens, as opposed to the marketing one. So that's, I guess, what the title means to me.
Yeah, and I'm all for it, honestly. So for those that are in the audience that might be new to marketing, what is your definition of social capital?
Social capital is generated for either individuals or for groups. It can be used actually in society and organizations, churches, and all kinds of different settings. But for our purposes, we think about organizations and businesses that derive value from what the science is called durable social relationships.
Mhm.
So once we develop social capital in our organizations, we see higher transfers of knowledge. We see everything from supply chain increasing efficiency to innovation to entrepreneurship increasing because it just generates a lot more trust and a lot more of that persistent reciprocity that gives and facilitates a lot of intellectual value and human capital.
Mhm.
So social capital in an organizational sense is that in that neighborhood. I spend the entirety of a chapter exploring what social capital means because it's pretty complex stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, social relationships and social ties are very complex, much more complex than I think social media marketers are willing to admit. And I think it's also a little strange because we are deeply wired to be social. So once you start defining it, it feels odd. It's like the water we're swimming in.
Mhm. Do you have any examples of somebody who gets it, or a company that gets it?
Yeah, there's several examples in the book. I talked to Zappos, several of their customer care folks who have really great examples of how to engage and use social media by way of not a marketing tool, but by way of a engagement tool.
Mhm.
I was able to interview this woman named Nicole Kelly, who had a marketing function in a nonprofit organization um, dealing with debt relief, and she had some really unique metrics around the people she was able first of all she was able to build this million person strong social community through
Mm.
social platforms and through forums where people were helping each other with debt relief tips and financial well-being kind of advice.
Yeah.
And she was able to measure their value in these really cool ways. If they touched the social media group, what they meant to the organization by way of some cool metrics. And
Uh,
by the way, Julie, she would tell you, and as she told me, that she stopped hiring marketing people for these roles because she got tired of trying to train people to unlearn marketing. She called her work community building. She said it was a flip on marketing,
mhm.
which is kind of my thesis in the book. And so it really resonated. And I think she's a really good example of that.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, it almost comes to down to just if you're ignoring your customer. I mean, that's what it sounds as though that like not you're ignoring your customer. That sounds a little way off, but kind of ignoring what their needs are. Their needs on social media are not to be sold to. They are trying to get questions answered. They're trying to find people that are like-minded. They're trying to be part of something. They're not trying to be sold to. So I'm curious if that was something that you came across as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You're touching on, I think, also why marketers are so biased and sort of unwilling to see the data that's telling them that social media marketing is not effective. We experience and look at social media completely different than the non-marketers who are participating in it do. We look at like production value and storytelling and possibilities of TikTok and this idea of what I call people using, like moving people through a funnel, versus how people engage in social media, which is reciprocity and
Yes.
connection and
Yes.
people building. Like, how can we
Yes.
all be better? Just like you do in any social circle. You join AMA Puget Sound, you join your church, you have your circle of friends. You're looking to people build, and
Mm.
when you get interrupted in those social constructs by marketing,
Yep.
we respond very, very strongly against it. And there's some neuroscience in the book that explains why.
Hmm.
But yeah, you're exactly right, and that's why it's such a I think A, why we're biased, and B, kind of illustrates the difficulties marketers have in actually making it effective.
Yeah, it's just it's driven into us that all of our analytics have to be driven to sales. That our analytics
Mm-hmm.
are just tied to the sales department, and if they succeed, we succeed. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think we should be as reliant on each other, those two departments. I think we need to be somewhat separated, and we need to be talking more to the customer service departments. When I was working at a company called People Connect, that was one thing that I made sure is no, we need to hear what customers are saying to our employees, like rather than this is what data says. We're humans. We need to be human. So, um, talking about all of this social change and social media, one chapter in the book, chapter two, in fact, it's about telemarketing.
Mm.
Definitely a precursor to pop up ads and things like that. So, and I love your description of how you describe it to somebody who just was not alive during that time or
Right,
hadn't
right.
been born yet. Um,
Yeah.
how was it writing that chapter? Like, just not because you were still pretty delicate and pretty nice about it compared to pretty much everybody who had lived through it, like calling me during dinner. Yeah,
Right,
tell us
right.
about that.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of I mean, it's the title of the chapter, and sort of plays a small role by way of metaphor in some ways,
Right.
or maybe an example of what happens when you, interrupt a social gathering with a marketing
Mhm.
message.
Yep.
It illustrates, you know, we'll also look at the book at the neuroscience around how our brains are operating and what is going on when we're engaged in social activity.
Mhm.
We kind of dissect this amazing book called Social by Dr. Matthew Lieberman. I keep saying we. I wrote the book. Like, who else am I talking about here? It's me. So I kind of use that as the telemarketing to illustrate a lot of the neuroscience. We
Mhm.
protect ourselves from all kinds of threats to social connections because they're so important to us and for our survival. And our
Mhm.
brains are wired to do it in the same way that we protect ourselves from physical pain. We feel the disconnect from a social relationship in the same part of our brain, Julie, that we feel physical pain.
Mhm.
So that's a really remarkable thing to sit with for a minute. That's
Mhm.
why we say we're heartbroken, or a gut punch when we're rebuked.
Yep.
And so we feel it in the same place of our brain as physical pain, and we protect it in the same way that we do from physical pain. So that same reaction that you have to remove your hand from the stove protects social connections. And
Right.
Dr. Lieberman makes a special note to say, special emphasis, I should say, to note that whether that social connection matters to us or not, it's so
Mhm.
hardwired.
Mhm.
So back to this idea of telemarketing, if you were to receive a telemarketing call, or if your audience is young and they don't know what telemarketing is, imagine a canvasser coming to your door and ringing a doorbell in the middle of game night.
Mhm.
It's that visceral reaction that we have where we sort of abandon all empathetic
Mhm.
norms and get so
Yeah.
upset and irritated with a salesperson, and that is because our brains are protecting those social connections, and we
Yeah.
seem to be sort of intuitively aware of that,
Mhm.
except when we decide we're going to do marketing in social media. That's when we
Right.
decide to just sort of ignore it and keep going. So
Exactly. And exactly. And it's even since then, since the telemarketing, how many businesses have adopted an automated calling system? So it's like I'm a half Gen X, half millennial. I don't know. So I was born in '80, so I'm like uh, both charts. I'm either one.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah, you're a
I'm
tweener.
afraid of the phone. Like, which is amazing because, in the 90s, I was that teenage girl on the phone all night, getting yelled at, like, before call waiting,
Right.
get off the phone,
Yeah.
waiting for a call. But now it's just like, oh God, I don't want the phone. Get that away from me. Unless you're texting me or an
Right.
email, I don't want to answer the phone. I don't know who you are. I don't know if it's important. Leave a message, please. For the love of Jeff, leave a message.
Right.
That's where I am. And that's really like, I shouldn't be afraid of a telephone, but it's just, you never know what's going to be on that other side. It's like, are you going to vote for this person? Are you going to buy this product? And it was usually what, toner back
Hmm.
in the 90s? I think it was like toner and printer ink.
Oh, that's funny.
Um,
Yeah.
and then
Who's
what?
the who's the comedian that makes the observation that the phone is the least used app on my phone?
Oh, that's a good point. I don't know, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, very, very true. Just because there's so many other ways to communicate that aren't so immediate. Like if you're going to
Right.
call me, something's wrong.
Right. Right.
Yeah, otherwise just text me because we're finally in that time of period, time of history where we don't have to respond immediately. We can have that delayed reaction with a text or with an
Sure.
email. And if
Right.
we need to really chat, we schedule a call. Our time,
Right.
I think, because we have much more access to technology, we're just doing more things now. So our time is finite. So that's my take.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think you're right, but I think in terms of how it relates back to kind of this idea of interrupting social constructs, that's another reason. Like,
Yep, 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 yep.
we've been interrupted. It's just sort of this barging in, especially when there's some kind of social activity going on the other end, and it's just
Mhm.
not an effective way. And once I think marketers figured out ways to do that, where the relationship was a little bit more two-way and reciprocal. Like, I know what I'm signing up for when I watch TV on a channel with ads. That's
Yes,
what pays for it. I know that I
exactly.
need to give my email address to download an industry white paper. Like, I'm
Mhm.
opted into that, but not when I'm engaged in social activity. It's like when you're walking with friends, through a fair or a music festival or something, and
Mhm.
somebody comes up and shoves a flyer in your face.
Yeah.
You reject that out of hand typically because you're not that part of your brain isn't engaged.
You're taken out of that in the moment. You're having fun, and then just I have to think about something else now. What? Yeah,
Yeah.
I they'll never go away. But I love that you touched on that in that chapter of when it became more two-way, it was definitely more transactional. Like you said, if I want this white paper, I here's my email address. When I drive, I know I'm going to see signs and billboards. It's
Mm.
fine. Or like you said, with television, you're going to see an ad, or YouTube, you're going to see an ad. You're fine with it because you have some control. You can walk away. You can keep driving past that billboard. The YouTube ad, you can mute it. You can skip ahead. Please don't on our
Right.
channel. But yeah, you have some control. Whereas if somebody calls you, I didn't ask for you to call me.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and again, in that sort of social construct setting, I find it interesting that Dr. Liebman talks about this. We use the part of our brain for interacting in social activities. We need the exercise, first of all. So we're constantly practicing and working on that part of our brain, even when we're at rest.
Mhm.
So that's the part of the brain that we're working on the most because it's so sophisticated and complex, like understanding how to negotiate all the sort of agendas and social relationships.
Yeah.
So it's really fine tuned and it's really strong and again very much hardwired after millions of years of evolution.
Mhm.
And he talks about that part of the brain when it's engaged in social activity is like a seesaw. The other parts, the other networks are almost turned off.
Yeah.
So you are when something like a transaction needs to happen, you need to switch the networks. Again, he says it's like a seesaw, and he makes special point about some of us are better at it than others. Most of us just it's a very difficult thing to do.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing that I think plays first of all plays into biases for marketers, right? We literally have our work hats on. We're
Yep.
engaged with a different part of our network that everybody else is, which we kind of touched on earlier. But it also illustrates what you're up against when you're trying to market and sell in social constructs. You're asking somebody to completely switch their neural network to hear your marketing message.
Mm.
It's a real uphill battle, but
It is.
yeah, it was an interesting part of the book that I was able to dive into as well, which was fun.
And if you get a chance, buy his book. Speaking of, this is all awesome, but and one thing that, so we've had several authors like yourself on the show, but I've never had the opportunity to really ask about what it goes into actually write, not just writing the book, uh, but publishing and all of that. And I was thinking about it earlier. What you're doing with you, so you wrote a marketing book, and what you're doing right now after is very meta because you're marketing a marketing book. So,
Right.
how, I mean, is it any different than you would with with an event campaign, or what have you learned about doing this specifically compared to maybe other campaigns you've done?
That's
Besides
an
being a lot
interesting
more
question.
personal.
Right, right. Well, and also, Julie, I've mentioned this to a couple of friends. It's totally the most vulnerable feeling I've ever had. I've got this book that I'm saying is a good idea, and you ought to give me money for it. It's about marketing, which I claim to be good at, and you ought to give me money for it. And I'm doing the marketing for it.
Mm.
So like if it fails, like it's completely on me, right? There's like no out. I've already started building up this built-in excuse around like people just don't buy books anymore, and that's what I'm gonna fall back on. But it's incredibly like vulnerable. But anyway, yeah, no, I think I'm finding it's as much about leadership as it is about marketing. And I've been on this sort of mission for a long time now to ask marketers to elevate their thinking about what it is that they do and start seeing themselves as leaders and seeing what they practice, what their craft is, as more of influence, which you can learn as much about from the leadership discipline than you can from the marketing one. So it's sort of there's a couple of different audiences, and when I've been trying to market it, figure out where I ought to be, sort of talking to people who can hopefully see some value in it. There's a couple of different audiences that I'm trying to kind of play out.
Mhm.
So that's unusual, where you're just sort of like skin in the game, trying to figure out a target market instead of just kind of theoretically or doing it for a client, which is a little
Mhm.
different.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's different. And then of course it's an anti-social media marketing book, so I can't really be on social media very much about it. I feel like that would be a little contrary to what I'm claiming.
But your
And I've got
friends
some kind
can.
of other what's that?
Your friends can. They
Yes,
can promote
yeah,
it
I
for you on
suppose so.
social. So you
Yeah.
have those allies.
Well, and it's not like I'm not. I think
Right.
it has relevance to my LinkedIn, connections, for example, and I'll tweet about it every now and then just for fun. We've got it all set up to track all of it, so
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to kind of go back, I don't know, in a year or something, and see what if what I wrote about is working
Mm.
there. But so there's a couple of things that kind of come to mind when you ask the question. I don't know if that answers it or not.
Oh yeah. So yeah, because you're pretty much doing it all yourself, about yourself, and it's a strange feeling for marketers. Like I've said this many, many, many times. Like we can market anything but ourselves, and it's hard, especially when like you said, it's easier to do something for a client or your employer to write this big white paper because it's the company's name on it, not yours. But once you put your name on it, it's just like you said, putting yourself out there and making sure that everybody else is hearing what you say and that
Right.
you're reading it. So what is have you had any surprises along the way that you would take with you in your next book?
Yeah, expectations around working with others, I guess, like and how long it takes for editing, for proofreading, for cover design, for all these kinds of different steps that I mentioned to you earlier when we were talking offline, that I wanted to go through the entire process to learn about it, and wanted to do as much of it myself as I could. Not that I would do the design, but I wanted to like hire the designer as an example and hire editors and kind of go through that process of it all. So I sort of had a good understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
the time and the patience that's required while it's out of your hands was really surprising to me. People kept asking me, like, when are you going to have it out? And I kept telling them, like, whatever, a month, and it would be 3 months later. So that was the biggest surprise, I'd say. I was
Mm-hmm.
also surprised at how motivated I was to write it. Like a lot of people were sort of warning me, like, I'll be here for you to keep you motivated to get this thing done. Amy Favreau, I don't know if you've ever met her. She's a AMA Volunteer of the Year and this sort of legend AMAer. That's what she was telling me. She's like, I'll be your accountability partner and I'll keep you going. And I didn't need help with that. As it turned out, I needed Amy to take like a client or two off my plate because
Oh,
the challenge was finding time, not motivation. So I was
right.
surprised by that as well.
Okay. Okay. Hope fingers crossed that happens again and
Right.
no writer's block. May you
Right.
be blessed with
Exactly.
no writer's block.
Yeah. 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 It really was a fulfilling process writing it for sure. And
Uh,
then the publishing it has been really interesting to learn. That's for sure. And then, yeah, as you alluded to, the self promotion stuff gets a little bad taste in my mouth, but whatever. I'll survive. It's all good. I'm still learning.
you'll get there. It's and what you learn, you're sharing with us. So that's very, very much appreciated. So thank
No, of course. I think especially for marketers, like marketers, if you're marketing to marketers, I learned this back in that first job I told you about just at the beginning of this conversation. If you're marketing to marketers, you better pull back your curtain because you come across as a complete fraud. Like
you.
we know what it means to write an ad, do a podcast, whatever, create a logo,
Oh yeah.
build a brand, sell, market. We know what that is, and so if you're not willing to kind of show the cracks, I think in a brand as you're marketing to marketers, I
Yep.
think people see through that veneer pretty easily in the marketing world. And so I don't know. I guess I just try to be myself and be honest in this space as much as I can.
That's what our parents taught us. Just be yourself,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
So we're kind of coming up on time. I knew we were going to go a little over because we talked a little bit about AMA earlier, but I wanted to give you a few minutes just to have the floor and kind of go over anything that you'd like to reiterate or anything that we didn't cover.
Sure. Thanks for that. I guess I would use this time to suggest that the book really focuses on a way to lead that is, again, focused on building and using social capital. And as we talked about, we are hardwired to be social creatures, which we can't help it. And so when you find something, I think that sort of recognizes the humanity in people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also an effective way to lead and influence, whether that's teams that you're leading in your workplace or groups on social media as a marketer, there really is no other choice, right? If it's effective and moral, you really have no other choice.
Right.
The other thing that I found in the process of writing this, Julie, was that um, the science of social networks, and there's all kinds of different terminology and the way clusters are formed and the way nodes and interactions happen, and the structures of them and all of that was really fascinating to learn. And I took two things away from it. One, social media marketers aren't even sort of near what it means to sort of intercede in that type of a sophisticated system. And really, we're still stuck in this kind of channel thinking, audience thinking that I think is really, really not effective or helping us, I guess. But the
Yeah.
second thing it was remarkable to find that this science really backs up everything that DEI experts are talking about. It talks about the difference between you find as you do this research, you find that the difference between strong ties and weak ties are interesting, but they're also each one creates value for the other. So a
Mhm.
weak tie, meaning something that isn't as sort of tightly woven into a networking cluster that gives you access and bridges to other groups, so diversity, brings all kinds of different value to an organization or to a network than those strong ties do. But strong ties also generate value. And the ability to sort of welcome those weak ties into that balance is equity and inclusion. And so the science behind networking just puts, heft behind these DEI efforts. And I think to sort of deny DEI is to deny not just kind of the humanity and recognizing the humanity in people,
Mhm.
but deny value to your organization. And here's one more thing quickly about on this topic. When you participate in creating a weak tie to your organization from another one, you are building the infrastructure, and the science is clear on this, building the infrastructure for idea sharing across different
Yes.
organizations and really for
Yes.
the community as a whole.
Mhm.
So just because your group doesn't find value in an idea doesn't mean that the idea isn't valid. It could find value somewhere else. So by participating in DEI, I think, and in social capital savvy leadership, you are participating in something much larger than yourself or your brand or your organization. It's really helping everybody. And so, I think what I've discovered in this book and what I hope that people will get excited about is this is something that means more than just driving funnel conversions
Mm.
using social media. It really, I think, is important for our brands and our organizations and our society.
Well said. I couldn't say it any better. But yeah, I'm so glad that you touched on DEI. If anybody knows either of us, they'll know that DEI is very, very important to each of us. In fact, you can check each of our chapters, AMA Colorado and AMA Puget Sound, in our DEI pledge, which I'll link below. And thank you so much for being here, Aaron, and everything that you shared with us. That yeah, social capital. We need to just start looking at humans as instead of just dollar signs.
Oh, man, Julie, thanks for having me. This was a blast. I love our conversations and
Yeah.
yeah, the opportunity to be here. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, yeah, we appreciate your time and everything that you have to share with us. And we're going to see each other soon. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
6 months, maybe. We'll see. Um, and then for everybody out there, if you're interested more in your local AMA chapter, you can pretty much just go to ama.org. And I believe at the bottom or even on the membership page, you can see where your local chapter is. In most cases, you can just type in the state or the city and you'll find one near you, or AMA near me. Get involved if you want to meet other like-minded folks. That's all we have for today. I know we had a bit of a break. That's all right. I'm so glad that you came along with us to come back, Aaron. And if you liked
Thank you.
today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe and comment below if you've had anything to add to the conversation. And I have all of Aaron's information down below as well. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie.
Have a great
Thanks.
day.
You
Bye.
too.